thought tonight we'd take this subject of prayer and to present it in the manner that Jesus did. When I discovered some years ago what a perfect technique Jesus had for teaching prayer, I almost got lost in the patience of him, the absolute patience with those men. Here was the Lord of all life, who had conquered everything and was now Christed, and he was coming into the world to give his message and the actual living of that message, and yet he could take these men and start from the ABC and teach them how and what to pray. And the patience of him. You know how I knew how patient he must be? Because I knew how patient he must be with me. We only know how patient he was and is when we discover how patient he is with us. Because although we might follow it in detail, how often do we trip up and don't follow it at all? And so I can remember when I went through this life of Jesus to find out just what his idea of prayer was and how to do it. And through the years, I have endeavored to do it that way. And I see now exactly the humor in his teaching and the patience, all those qualities that at last got into some of those dumb heads like ours are sometimes. Always he was patient. Now, this is the Sermon on the Mount, of course, and we will start with the 5th verse of the 6th chapter. And I will use the word you instead of thou. And when you pray, you shall not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. Now, I had read that many times and hadn't realized, how quick they got their reward, and it was worth nothing. Well, that was very well to be judging them, but what about me? And I could remember thinking, yes, I could remember being in that prayer group and was a little bit nervous of praying, and I can remember that I said a very nice prayer, and I can remember subtly feeling, I hope they all thought so. And I can remember many, many things. For instance, somebody would say, that was a wonderful prayer. I had my reward. That was what I was seeking. I had my reward. And I often looked into little things that I was doing and found how quick was the reward. No value at all, because it came from men sought by my own subtleties. And so you see, we've all done this. Perhaps sometimes even today, without thinking, we trip back into that Pharisee way of praying. And then he says, but you, and this verse to me is one of the most exquisite verses in the Bible, because it is so absolutely personal, that if you ever doubted that the Spirit of God was within you, this verse would prove to you that he is. But you, when you pray, just think of the many yous there are in this. But you, when you pray, enter into your closet, and when you have shut your door, pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who seeth in secret will reward you openly. A completely personal thing. To me, that is absolutely wonderful. Now, Jesus there was being very, very brilliant, because he knew that anybody who was doing things that could not possibly please the Father would not dream of going in and shutting that door. They wouldn't dream of going in at all. And so he says, tell your Father in secret. Is there anybody here who just yet hasn't been able to go and tell the Father everything in secret? You know, that's a very, very close contact. To shut the door on everything and tell your Father in secret. Now, there's more to it than that, because further along in our spiritual life, there comes that wonderful challenge to tell no man, but to tell the Father in secret. And you know, there's a great joy there. At first, of course, it's hard, because it's very natural to go and tell somebody some idea we've got, or some wonderful thing that's going to be, some wonderful thing we've done, and wonderful thoughts that we've had. But he says, tell no man, go within and tell your Father. And you know, it's as though you go into a center of power, such power that because it's between you and the Father, nothing shatters it, nothing scatters it, it is there. And whatever is said to the Father in secret is left alone with the Father for him to carry through right to the end, with no interference of mortal mind, no interference of any friend saying, I doubt if you'll ever do that. It's a big thing, you know. Think of the expense. And do you think you'll ever get enough wisdom to carry it through? I mean, it's a big job for you. Do you feel strong enough? All those loving suggestions that come from outside, when inside the Father says, tell me all about it. Let's talk about it. Let's come together and reason it out. And then he gives the ideas, or perhaps waits a long time before the next step. But if we still keep giving it to him in secret, ultimately he rewards us openly. Some of you have had this experience, and you must have had your friends say to you, I don't understand it. Whatever you want to carry through gets carried through, and so quickly. And it may have been years that you told your Father in secret. And your Father brought it about, yes, right at the right time, in the right way, through the right people, in the right place. And it looked as though all you did was say, Father, I'm ready, and it comes. No, it's telling him in secret, and let him take his own time to shape it, because he knows when it must be manifested. He knows when you're going to need it. He knows when you've got to do it. He knows whom you have to meet. And so this Lord of your being is capable of taking what you tell him in secret and rewarding you openly. So Jesus gave a tremendous truth in that one verse. Then he says, when you pray, use not vain repetitions as the heathen do. And I love, in place of that word heathen, foreigners to the truth. Foreigners to the truth. When you pray, use not vain repetitions as foreigners to the truth do, for they think that they will be heard for their much speaking. Have we ever done that? Have we ever done that? Tell him in the morning, tell him at noon, tell him at night. Wake up next morning, tell him again. Keep on telling him. Vain repetition, vain repetition. Why is there such a thing in our prayers? Why is it we don't ask him once, leave it? He knows what to do. Why do we keep on? Because we do not believe in the closeness of his Spirit. He has the ear that hears. And before we call, he answers. So why do we keep on with vain repetition? Somebody told me once that when she's asked to pray for somebody, she does it for 7 days, and then if she hears nothing from the person, she drops that name and she starts praying for another one. Well, I said, now supposing you were asked to pray for that person on Saturday, and say she was healed on Sunday, you'd go on all the week praying for her? Well, she said, I wouldn't know. I said, no, you wouldn't know, but the point is this. If you really pray and you give it to the Father, I mean give it to the Father, like some of us have been doing in the prayer groups this week, literally shedding it. One lady told me this week that she felt as if something had fallen from her shoulders. She meant her heart. But that's how she felt. She'd lost the burden. Well, it had been given. It had been given. If you take a watch to be repaired or your radio to be repaired, you keep going into that man every single day and saying, will you repair my watch? Will you mend my radio? Do you keep right on? And if your child comes to you for a little pocket money and you say, yes, I'll give that to you Friday, would you like it if that child came to you several times a day until Friday? Could I have some pocket money? You'd say, I told you that you could have it. And your Father says, it is my pleasure to give you the kingdom. It is his pleasure that all the things you need in life and for your spiritual welfare will be given to you. So therefore, this vain repetition is really, well, sometimes I wonder whether it isn't because we don't believe he hears at all. There is one point there, though, that if we have a truth that we can't yet realize, it is good to keep saying that to oneself till at last the truth of it dawns on you. Like many Easterners have said, if they keep saying the name of God so that they've got nothing else in their mind, at last this name is established in their consciousness. Yes, that may be very good, but to talk to God, to ask God, to approach him with something constantly. I am sure Jesus meant we were not to do that when he said, use not vain repetitions. He says, now be not like them. Your Father knows what you have need of before you ask him. Oh, isn't that wonderful? That he loves us to come to him, but he knows before we ever come what we need. And so then he told us how to pray, and you know that prayer. We need not go through that. But do you know, friends, if that Lord's Prayer had been prayed with full realization just for 1 century and much less, but we'll say 1 century after he had gone away, why, this whole world would now be a visible kingdom of God. Because if everybody had really said it and had lived those Beatitudes so that they were bringing about the kingdom in their own lives, can't you see that very shortly it would come? How do we know it would shortly have come? Because if one of us here practice this and carry out these Beatitudes in our daily lives, which are the attitudes of being, why, we too can say, the kingdom has come in my life. I find that everything that comes to me comes now from God through channels, wisdom, a gem out of a book, a truth that a child utters. All these things now are coming to me. I'm getting kingdom teaching. God is teaching me. Everything I possess is now coming from my Father. Everything I give, I feel is given from him. I'm using his substance. And so if any one of us have reached that, why, we know how quickly the kingdom of God can be established. We know that it can be here and now, and we know that we are in the world but not of it, and we know that we shall never want, and we know that he will put the words into our mouth, what we shall say. We know these things if we live in his kingdom by keeping his commandments. And so ultimately this prayer, the Lord's Prayer, would be said something like this. Our Father, it'll always be our, because the our means we're all one. Our Father, thou art in heaven, and I do hallow thy name. And it would be said with such joy, thy kingdom has come into my life, and thy will is being done all day long in my life as it is in heaven. Thou hast given me every day my daily bread, and thou hast forgiven me my trespasses, as I have forgiven those who trespass against me. and I have been led into temptation, but thou hast delivered me from evil. For thine is forever the kingdom, the power, and the glory. And the day will come when every soul will not have to say, thy kingdom come. They will say, it has come. So you see, Jesus was giving them a positive prayer, a beginning that would last eternally till they could say, it has come. So how wonderful he was. He gave these beautiful, positive truths in that prayer. Well, then we don't hear too much about prayer, actually, till we get to that chapter where he says, ask and it shall be given you. And I will tell you what I discovered out of this. Ask and it shall be given you. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. But do you realize he didn't say there, but be careful what you ask for. He didn't say be careful at which door you are knocking. He didn't say be careful what you are seeking. And I believe he did that for a reason. I believe it because of the circumstances in my own life. I can remember as a little child when mother and father wouldn't give me the things I wanted, I used to think, well, it doesn't matter. I'll go upstairs and I'll ask God. He will. A little simple idea that if God made this big world and me, I couldn't see why he couldn't give me a little thing I wanted. Now, I learned that whatever I asked him for, I could have, and invariably I received it in the strangest ways for my parents. They couldn't understand it. But look, Jesus didn't say be careful here what you ask for. He simply stated that it's a law because he said, now what man is there of you that if your son would ask you for bread, would you give him a stone? Wouldn't you give him exactly what he asked for? Of course you would. And he said if he asked you for a fish, would you give him a serpent? No, you would give him what he asked for. He was showing what common sense this was. To ask, you would receive. And the thing you asked for, you would get. Because you believed you would get it. So he said this, and oh friends, I'm sure you, as well as I, learned through the years that I wished I hadn't asked for certain things with this great big belief that I would get it. Because it took me longer to get rid of it. There's a funny little story told about a woman who prayed that she would get a husband for 5 years, and she said it took her 10 years to get rid of him. Now we know that's silly, and we shouldn't talk like that really, but still. The point is this. There are many things we have asked for believing. You know that a very worldly businessman goes into that business, and he's positive he's going to make a success of it. He uses even the principles. He leaves out love. But he uses the principles. The principles. Desire, will to back it up, and positive that it will come into manifestation. And we see all around us in the world the manifestation of the power of man's thinking and his belief in what he can get and what he can do. But you see, minus the knowledge that God is the giver of every perfect gift, and God knows our needs, why, we can make an awful mess of our lives and bring into it a whole lot of things. I can remember going into a house once and I saw a model of a car, a picture of a model of a car pinned on the wall, and they told me they'd been concentrating on that car for over a year and they knew they were going to get it. I said, you better hurry up, it'll be an old model. Now, if God gives you something, he's going to give you what you need now for present-day use. And he gives you the very best. Remember, man doesn't invent all the wonderful things without God, does he? The only reason he leaves God out is because he wants the fame and the glory, and he wants to commercialize it. These are the things that will pass away. Those things won't last. But the things that God gives us, we we are happy to use as we receive them, using it in his service, and of course when it's no longer necessary, it is discarded or taken away, because God says, I make all things new. You don't have to hang on to the old things in case he can't give you something a little better for your next job that he appoints you to have. I believe the freedom of the sons of God has never yet been fully realized. There is such a freedom and such a liberty in letting God choose for us that we've never realized what a joy that would be. To be so busy in his service, so busy in his kingdom, prompted by his voice, obeying his voice, forgetting what equipment we needed, forgetting how we'd ever get there, but just knowing we're going to do it. And then, life is a surprise. Do you know that when you plan to do things and work out how much it will cost and whether there'll be any over and all the rest of it, and even if you work it out very beautifully so that it's safe for you to start, why, you don't have any joy. You're still working on every little division of the way you worked it out. But if you start off with God, such a surprise. He has such surprises when your mind is stayed upon him. You'll go to a place where you think it's just going to be so flat and awful and you don't see how you're ever going to manage. And he says, no, I'm here. Where you see there is nothing, that's where I am everything. Everything. And that is the Father whom I have learned to love with all my heart. Now, Jesus didn't get as far as this, telling them this. He wanted them to find out that as they asked, they might be sorry they'd asked. I'm positive he did. People today are knocking at the wrong doors for wisdom. They ought to be able to look into any door and realize that they have come to that I am the door. They've got the right door. Having the right door, they ought to be able to look into any door and pick out what is good and leave the chaff. They ought to be able to, but sometimes they are lured away because they have never consciously realized I am the door. And no man can come to the Father but by me. And those who would enter the kingdom in another way are like thieves and robbers climbing up the back door.